Imagine the night as a velvet curtain slowly lifting, revealing Athens in early spring. Air cool and mineral bright, the streets hushed except for a broom's whisper on marble and the distant creak of a cart. And there ahead, the Panathenaic Stadium, pale as the inside of a seashell, waiting like a blank page. This is 1896, and the world has arrived by slow ships and rattling trains carrying more hope than luggage, a chorus of voices that don't quite share a language, yet somehow share a promise. If you listen closely, you can hear it, soft as breath on glass. We're back. Not back to a perfect past, but back to a conversation that started centuries ago when feet first drummed dust into meaning. The seats gleam with fresh Pentelic marble, each slab hand-set, hand-polished, the curves rising in white ribs around an open heart. And at the center, markings of chalk wait like quiet instructions. Pierre de Coubertin did not dream of fireworks or blaring brass. He dreamed of character, of a classroom without walls where rivalry cleanses rather than corrupts, where effort is a daily prayer said with calves and lungs and patience. Tonight, the city is a library of warm stones and slow footsteps, and every step seems to say, tomorrow we begin. Microhook. What if the most revolutionary thing is not a roar, but a silence people agree to keep together? Traders stacking oranges under awnings glance up as foreigners pass. A gymnast from Germany with a careful smile. A Greek runner with patched shoes, an American jumper who packed a notebook, a Danish fencer with a family ribbon in his pocket. Their bags are light, their eyes are wide, and almost all of them have day jobs they'll return to after this brief life out of time. In small rooms, they lace shoes, unroll wool socks, touch wood and leather as if greeting old friends. Someone hums a folk tune, someone coughs, someone writes a date on the inside cover of a book. The organizers, sleeves rolled, move like metronomes. Ink, stamp, ledger, line, a choreography of paper and conviction. There is no committee room full of screens, only men and women who believe calendars and courage can bend to meet each other halfway. Outside the stadium, children press at the gates, whispering about uniforms and strange accents and whether the long jump is really as far as a story claims. In a cafe where the floor is checkerboard tile and the light seems to arrive already filtered, a group of visitors compares spoons of honey as seriously as they will compare times tomorrow. Microhook. If you could choose one small object to carry the memory of a city, would you pick a spoon, a leaf, or a line of chalk? The stadium remembers more than it should. Processions, festivals, lamplight, and now these modern boots with their neat rows of eyelets. Workers rub dust from their palms, looking at the oval with a low, satisfied nod. Everything is clean, everything is honest, nothing is perfect. Nearby, a tailor stays, open late, reattaching a button to a jacket that will be worn on a podium no one has finished building. And somewhere, a schoolroom door is left ajar. The book's half closed, because even teachers want to see what learning looks like when it moves. At the harbor, the waters have gone mirror smooth, holding alongside a moon thin as a thread. And on deck, a rower turns a handle on a small music box. The melody tinny and astonishingly tender. Tomorrow the box will stay in the bag, but the tune will be in his arms. Microhook. What if the most accurate clock in Athens is not a tower, but a heartbeat you can hear in your own ear when you lie still? Midnight drifts into the soft gray of almost morning. Roosters consider the matter. A breeze uncurls behind the hills and slips along the stadium steps. Lanterns gutter out one by one. And yet the darkness is kind, never total, leaving the moon to paint the marble. On a practice field, a Greek runner traces the curve of the track with his finger, then puts his palm flat against his chest as if to say, Remember this. A German coach adjusts a rope until its hang is exact, and then, satisfied, lays his hat over the knot like a blessing. And in a small rented room, a future marathoner stares at the ceiling and follows a line of hairline cracks as though they were roads on a map. He knows every hill between Marathon and Athens by rumor and by wish. He knows he has no right to win. He knows he will try. Microhook. Is history the sum of grand designs, or the angle of a single footfall finding courage at the right moment? Dawn will come pale and lemon soft. Crowds will gather not to witness spectacle, but to witness one another. Flags will be simple, clothes simpler, the air full of starch and citrus and ordinary prayer. The king will enter, and the hum will rise, not like thunder, but like bees, warm and working. And when the first starter's pistol coughs a thread of smoke, the world will hold its breath so neatly you could balance a coin on it. This is not a beginning in the sense of emptiness before content. It is a beginning like fresh ink touching an old, beloved line. And in that first beat between silence and stride, between hope and muscle, Athens will teach a lesson every century thinks it invented. That the body is a sentence, meaning we are still here. That fairness is a craft. That grace is a choice. Microhook. If you could bottle this morning and sip it whenever cynicism bites, would you taste marble dust, orange peel, or the sound of shoes finding the mark? Morning opens like a careful eye, not startled but curious, and the streets begin to braid themselves into paths that lead, inevitably, to the stadium. Vendors set out bread that cracks softly, oranges that glint like small suns, and jugs of water beating with cold. Spectators arrive in waves, families in their Sunday best, sailors with sleeves rolled, students with notebooks held like talismans. And the hum of many languages settles into a kindly murmur. The procession of athletes forms at the far gate with a shuffling grace. Greeks at the heart and then the others, each bearing the calm pride of having come this far. There are no towering banners, only modest flags and a certain way of standing that says, "We'll do our best." A boy at the railing counts the uniforms under his breath and decides, halfway through, to count smiles instead. When the hymn swells, it is not grandiose, but neighborly, carried by ordinary throats that happen to be together in one place. And the marble throws the sound back, as if pleased to be included. The king's presence adds a formal glow. But what most people notice is the spring light combing through the air, settling on faces, stitching distant and local into the same quilt. Microhook. If you could keep only one detail from this morning, would it be the sound of the hymn, the feel of sun on the nape, or the sight of strangers nodding as if they'd been introduced by history itself? The first events move like hands learning a new instrument, tentative, then sure. The sprinters crouch, fingers pinning their shadows to the earth. A hush collects, and the starter's crack lifts all heads. What follows is not fury, but clarity. Knees like pendulums, arms conducting breath. The track a ribbon unspooling under intention. At the finish, there is surprise and laughter, and the earnest handshake of men who know their lungs by first name. The long jump lays a white stripe for proof, and welcomes footprints like signatures. In the cool corners of the field, the pole vaulters whisper to the sky, asking politely for room. Each attempt writes a brief question mark into the air and lands it on the far side, where it becomes a soft exclamation. Spectators learn the rhythm quickly. Inhale, gaze, exhale, clap. And soon the stadium is fluent in this new old language, punctuation and all. Microhook. Is there anything more modern than learning how to watch with kindness? Gymnastics arrive with the hush of a chapel. Rings tremble gently as if remembering wind. The pommel horse gleams like a well-fed rumor, and the parallel bars hold their silver lines. Routines are neat rather than daring, but their neatness is a shape of bravery. Wrists set firm, toes a whisper from the wood, landings like commas placed with care. A German team in blue steps as one, and suddenly the day has a spine. Nearby, the weightlifting platform hosts its private negotiation with gravity. The bar rises not by force alone, but by conversation, breath, angle, patience. And when it settles overhead, the applause is less a burst than a tide rolling in. One lifter glances to the stands and finds, astonishingly, his mother smiling with a hand pressed to her mouth. He laughs, the bar wobbles, but he steadies it and lowers it to a purring thud. Micro hook. Which weighs more in that instant, iron, or the look that says, "I see you"? Outside the gates, a shoemaker hammers a new heel onto an athlete's tired boot and refuses payment. A baker slips a fresh roll into a pocket with the authority of a pharmacist. In a narrow alley, a troop of kids reenacts the sprint using buttons for medals, awarding each other with solemn nods that erupt into giggles. The city, it seems, is practicing the games in its own small theaters. Inside, the schedule unfolds like a linen cloth pushed smooth by many hands. Records are made because there were none yesterday, and every number looks like a door. If there is rivalry, it is a cousin of respect, walking alongside and pointing out the view. Officials pace with clipboards like gardeners with pruning shears, snip a confusion here, adjust a rule there. And the day keeps breathing evenly. In the upper rows, a woman sketches the stadium in soft graphite. Later, she will label the tiny dots us, micro hook. When we say we were there, do we mean our bodies occupied seats? Or do we mean our attention took root and bloomed? Afternoon leans toward gold. The track heat rises in faint wavering sheets, not cruel, just present. Distant bells mark the hour like careful stitches. Word circulates about a race that will follow the ancient road from Marathon. An experiment stitched out of legend and mapped onto muscle. Runners study a crude chart pinned to a board, measuring the hills with their eyebrows. One Greek, quiet, wiry, smelling faintly of olive soap and effort, says little and ties his laces with the exactness of a scribe. People notice him not because he shines, but because he doesn't try to. In the stands, a teacher explains to his pupils that history is not a wall text, but a practice. And today, they are seeing a rehearsal become a performance. Micro hook. If a myth puts on shoes and steps into the dust, is it still a myth? Or just a longer kind of truth? Evening will come, but not yet. The day elongates with the elastic grace of someone who doesn't want to say goodbye. Metals. Simple laurel, simple silver. Wait in a bowl that has known citrus and salt and now knows ceremony. The announcer's voice grows soft, a dusk version of itself. And in every seat where a stranger sat this morning, someone familiar sits now. Because watching together is a craft and the city has taken to it quickly. A final sprint flares like a struck match, then goes out, leaving behind a thin ribbon of smoke in memory. The gates loosen and people spill gently into streets, their footsteps translating the stadium's language for the neighborhoods. The marble cools, the chalk rests, and a broom whispers across the track, not to erase, but to bless. Micro hook. As the light folds itself neatly and tucks away, what stays? The numbers, the faces, or the way your chest learned a quieter way to beat? Night returns like a thoughtful editor, trimming the city's noises to a legible margin. And in small lodgings, the runners set out their gear for the long experiment called the Marathon. Socks folded like promises, a tin cup, a slice of bread, a lucky ribbon. Maps are scarce, but stories are plentiful. an ancient messenger, dust in his teeth, the road that hums with echoes. And the organizers, with straight faces and hopeful hearts, pin numbers to vests as if fastening wishes to cloth. In a courtyard lit by a gentle moon, someone draws the course in chalk across flagstones. Hills sketched as knuckles, wells marked with circles. And the men nod, not to the drawing but to the idea that a legend can be walked into the present if you simply keep placing one foot beyond the last. Among them, the quiet Greek Spyridon Louis, a water carrier from the village of Marousi, has the shrug of someone who knows distance not as romance, but as work. He has hauled weight through heat and ordinary days, and his stride has no ornament. Before sleep, he eats olives, drinks a little wine, and thanks the night as if it were a neighbor. Micro-hook. Is endurance a talent or a conversation with discomfort that you refuse to end? Dawn of race day spreads thin and silvery, the kind that doesn't startle the eyes. The start is set near the plain of Marathon, and the field clusters like a flock finding formation. The air cool, the earth smelling faintly of fennel and stone. There is banter. There is advice nobody will remember after 10 kilometers. There is the quiet inventory each man takes of his own breath. A pistol crack and they unspool along the road, long shadows knitting and raveling with each bend. Villages wake as they pass. Doorways fill. A child runs a few proud steps beside them and peels away grinning. The early pace belongs to foreigners with crisp strides and tidy reputations. And that is fine. Distance is a patient teacher. Louis sits back like someone letting soup cool, every inhale measured, every exhale a stitch pulled just so. The road rises, and you can hear shoes negotiating gravel. See shoulders tilt as hills ask their questions. A cart rattles by the other way, with cabbages and waves its leafy encouragement. Micro-hook. When the course turns uphill, do you climb the hill, or the version of yourself who prefers to stop? Midway, the sun declares itself, and heat begins its quiet tax. At a well, a villager offers water in a clay cup, and another offers a wedge of orange like a sunrise you can hold. Louis drinks, thanks, and runs on with that modest, practical cadence that looks like nothing until it looks like everything. Rumors move faster than legs. The Frenchman leads. No, the Australian. A Greek is steady. And at each square, the news is folded into the city's breath. Officials on bicycles glide alongside like thoughtful herons, counting, scribbling, offering the slim comfort of presence. A horse snorts, a dog barks once, and then decides this is not his business. In the ditch, flowers tilt their small faces and keep counsel. Micro-hook. If you could place one word into a runner's head at kilometer 30, would it be brave, patient, or home? Near the climbs past Pikermi, the early bravado thins. Footsteps spread apart. The field loosens like a belt after a long meal. Louis moves forward not in a surge, but in an absence of slowing, the way a candle seems to brighten when the room dims. He passes a man whose face is turned inward like a locked door, then another whose stride frays. He does not gloat. He does not look back. He tends to his breath as a gardener tends to a row of beans, exact in small things. Spectators begin to whisper in a new tense. The Greek is coming. At a crossroads, his cousin thrusts a little wine in a cup, and Louis smiles the quick, apologetic smile of a working man, taking a kindness he didn't plan for. The road tips downward and Athens sends its first messengers on fast legs toward the stadium. Our man leads. And cafes tilt, markets pause, the city inhales. Micro-hook. What travels faster? The fastest runner or hope with a shortcut? Through every open door. The last kilometers are a negotiation with everything that aches. Louis's arms grow wooden, his mouth a kiln. but his eyes keep their same light. The gates of Athens are a rumor becoming architecture, and along the boulevard people thicken into a river, hands outstretched with water, with words, with the kind of gaze that lays down planks over fatigue. Dignitaries hurry to the stadium, the royal box tenses, the marble readies its echo. Inside, events halt, the track a quiet oval of expectation. When Louis enters the arena, the sound is not a roar, but a lifting, an exhale turned inside out, and he lifts his knees a hair higher as if the crowd itself were a hand at his back. Two princes, breaking etiquette with joy, jog beside him for the final meters, a gesture that says ceremony serves people, not the other way round. He crosses the line with the face of a man finishing a shift, then learns, almost as an afterthought, that he has become a story. Laurel finds his hair, hands find his shoulders, and the city finds a version of itself it wants to keep. Micro-hook. When an ordinary worker wins a myth, does the myth become more human, or do we become a little more myth? Later, asked what he wants as a reward, Louis speaks in the currency of his life. A cart, a donkey, a small shop. Useful things. And the king, amused and moved, grants him enough to stitch comfort to his days. In alleys, boys run laps with twigs for torches. Girls draw wreaths in dust and crown one another with abundant ceremony. And in kitchens, women retell the finish as though they had been the princes at his side. The marathon will never again be only legend or only distance. It will be a way a city once recognized itself in a running man and decided to keep recognizing. Night gathers the stadium into its soft fist, leaving the marble to cool and the chalk to dream of new lines. Somewhere, a broom whispers. Somewhere, a cup is washed and set to drain. Athens sleeps with a slightly fuller chest. In the days that follow, the games learn how to breathe on their own, as if the city had taught them a lullaby. Schedules become muscle memory, whistles light as birds, and the stadium's marble seems to warm from the inside out with the glow of repetition. Sprinters refine their starts until silence itself seems to bend forward with them. Gymnasts land with the gentleness of punctuation marks, and weightlifters negotiate with iron in the tone two old friends use when they disagree, but will dine together anyway. Medals are modest. Silver for first, bronze for second, laurel for the brow. And yet they feel grand, because the hands that receive them tremble not with greed, but with gratitude. One afternoon, the German team moves like a paragraph that never stumbles. And the crowd, many of whom have no idea how such events are judged, claps in the universal grammar of, "We saw you do something careful and kind to gravity." Nearby, an American jumper carves an arc, so clean it might have been drawn with a compass. Then walks back to his mark and thanks the official who chalked his board, creating a small economy of respect. Micro-hook. If excellence were a house, would you build it with thunder or with repeated quiet gestures mortared by attention? Away from the field, Athens grows fluent in welcome. Shopkeepers learn how to say good luck in 3 new tongues. A barber hangs a comb on the wall like a medal because he trimmed the hair of a champion. A seamstress tells her daughter to stitch hems as straight as a lane line. Evenings turn to soft festivals. Not fireworks, but conversations at doorways. Cups that refill themselves. Songs that keep almost whispering even after mouths have closed. And yet the games are not only glow, they are decisions. There are debates about rules, about distances measured by rope or by eye, about how to balance courtesy with exactness. Officials meet in a side room that smells of lemon oil and paper and agree that fairness is not an ornament, but a tool that must be sharpened daily. In the stands, women watch. Present, vivid, excluded from competition this time. And their gazes write a promissory note that later decades will cash. Micro-hook. When a door is shut politely, does the future learn to knock softly or to arrive with its own key? Coubertin walks the stadium steps at dusk, touching the rail as if checking a pulse. He did not build this alone, not by a long shot, but he recognizes in the hum of the place the answer to a question he once dared to ask. Can character be taught in motion? He notes what failed, a schedule that crowded itself, an apparatus that wobbled, a rule too loosely defined. And what bloomed? The handshake that became a habit, the crowd that learned to cheer for effort, the city that realized it can host the world with clean hands and clear eyes. A young Greek volunteer falls into step beside him and tells of running errands between the judges' table and a bakery where the baker insisted the bread was for the games and therefore free. They both laugh at the mathematics of generosity. Micro-hook. What if legacy is not a monument, but a recipe anyone can make? Flour, salt, water, time, and the decision to share. Closing day arrives not as a curtain slamming, but as a page being turned with a thumb that lingers. The stadium is polished one more time until the sun has a proper mirror. Athletes stand shoulder to shoulder, a geography textbook rewritten in posture and gratitude. The hymn returns, familiar now, and voices climb it like a simple staircase. Awards are given with friendly ceremony. No gold, not yet, but something brighter than metal. A sense that being witnessed has weight. Spyridon Louis reappears in his ordinary clothes, laurel long since dried, and receives a wave from the crowd that feels like a gentle tide pushing a small boat. A Greek boy, heart thudding, reaches out to touch the marble and decides to remember the coolness forever. Micro-hook. When the book of a city closes for the night, do the letters sleep? Or do they rearrange themselves into tomorrow's sentences? As the stadium empties, Athens offers its final lessons. That streets can be both roots and rooms. That language can be a bridge built from nods. That success can be measured in the quiet with which people return to their lives. Ships prepare to depart, trunks accept their last shirts. Tickets are folded along the same creases that brought them here. Goodbyes are efficient but affectionate. Handshakes, promises to write, addresses scribbled on the backs of programs. In a cafe, the proprietor removes the little sign that has been up all week. Never mind the price, only the thirst, and tucks it behind the counter as a relic. Coubertin drafts a letter in a neat, slightly hurried hand. Paris, he thinks, then London, then where the map feels unafraid. Not a chain, exactly, but a rosary of efforts. Each bead rubbed bright by. Use. The Panathenaic Stadium exhales. Marble cools, chalk retires to a rag. A broom makes a final pass, as if underlining the day. The city, like a teacher after a good lesson, sets the chairs back in order and smiles at the door. Micro-hook. If you could carry one souvenir that isn't an object, would you take the way the crowd learned to cheer for strangers? Or the way strangers learned to walk the same street and call it ours? The ships slip from Piraeus, like commas departing a long sentence, and yet the meaning lingers. On deck, uniforms hang from lines beside ordinary shirts, medals tucked into socks so they won't clink, notebooks fattened with names of strangers who feel suspiciously like cousins. The sea has the calm confidence of a page already read twice, and Athens recedes not as a vanishing place, but as a kept promise. In train compartments, athletes trade sandwiches and silence, looking out at olive groves that seem to wave them along. And somewhere between stations, a German gymnast demonstrates a wrist exercise in the aisle, and a Greek sailor nods as if he's learning a new way to tie rope. Micro-hook. When the crowd disperses, is the event over? Or does it simply change rooms and continue inside us? Coubertin writes by lamplight, his letters a chain of small torches traveling across envelopes. To friends, to skeptics, to the future host he has not yet met. He records not only results, but textures. The politeness at the water wells, the steadying hand on a wobbly apparatus, the way applause discovered a slower, kinder tempo. He notes the gaps too. Women's absence on the field, the need for clearer measurement, the humble chaos of schedules. Next time, he writes, and the words feel both daring and domestic, like planning a larger kitchen for a family that has learned to cook together. In Paris, a schoolboy will soon pin a newspaper clipping to his wall and start running laps behind a bakery at dawn. And in Melbourne, a rower will carry buckets to strengthen his grip because he liked the honesty of the Greek water carrier's stride. Micro-hook. What is inheritance if not ordinary people altering the angle of their mornings? Back in the villages around Athens, the games persist as habits. A butcher sharpens his knives with the focus of a sprinter at the mark. A seamstress lays her tape measure across a table as if setting a lane. Children chalk hopscotch grids that suspiciously resemble a track. And a teacher finds that her students listen better if she begins class with the kind of quiet used before a starter's pistol. The Panathenaic Stadium, empty but not lonely, absorbs sun in long white breaths and releases it at dusk like memory warming the hands. Groundskeepers become curators, sweeping not just dust, but the ghostly footfalls of an afternoon when cheers resembled birds taking off. A guide leads a small group through the stands and tells them about Spyridon Louis, voice steady as if reading a familiar prayer. And a visitor touches the railing and feels it cooler than expected, like a kept secret. Micro-hook. If places had lungs, which moments would they breathe in and which would they hold? Newspapers abroad draw cartoons. Spry runners with laurel crowns, a stadium shaped like a generous smile. And editorials argue about professionalism, about the soul of sport, about whether nations can borrow pride from one another without debt accruing. The surprising consensus. It felt good to watch strangers try hard and then shake hands. In taverns and parlors, conversations peel away suspicion like an orange. First, the bitter pith, then the bright segments. A farmer says he cried when the Greek won and is not ashamed. A clerk confesses he cheered for a German on the rings because the lines were so clean they left no room for pettiness. Micro-hook. What if admiration is a currency that increases in value the more we spend it? Months pass, and the afterglow proves to be a lantern rather than a sparkler. Clubs are founded in dusty rooms with earnest minutes. Fields are marked on meadows with twine, borrowed whistles, and big intentions. A woman in Zurich organizes a running society for ladies and writes to other cities asking for advice. A boy in Cairo teaches his friends a start. He learned from a sketch in a magazine. A collective grammar forms. Lanes, bars, bows, lifts, attempts, applauses, verbs and nouns that travel better than most politics. The idea of hosting again begins to take on the solidity of furniture. Paris, 1900, whispers its way into publishers' offices and cafe corners, gathering agreements like coats on a rack. Micro-hook. Is tradition a stone road laid once, or a footpath renewed by each passerby? And Athens itself, once the opening chapter, becomes a margin note that future editions consult. Remember the honesty of marble. Remember the clarity of simple metals. Remember that fairness is a tool to be sharpened daily. A custodian keeps a drawer of lost and found, an armband, a button, a foreign coin. Tiny fossils of a week when the city taught itself to speak hospitality as if it were its mother tongue. At night, the stadium receives crickets and starlight, generous guests both, and dreams of footsteps that have not yet arrived. Somewhere, an old woman tells a child about the morning when voices rose like bees and a working man ran into a story. And the child, not yet tied to years, decides the world can be both small and grand, without contradiction. Micro-hook. When a tale settles into the voice of elders and the ears of the very young, has it finished or finally begun? Years slide forward like well-turned pages, and the Athens chapter becomes a bookmark people reach for whenever plans feel too heavy. Committees meet in rooms with tall windows, the air smelling of ink and rain, to sketch the next gathering in Paris. Timetables more exact, measuring tape standardized, rules written not as scoldings, but as invitations to play. Fair. Engineers test stopwatches against church bells. Officials compare chalks so the white on a board in Lyon looks like the white in Lisbon. Printers fuss over programs until the type can be read by a grandmother in the 7th row. Micro-hook. If fairness had a sound, would it be a metronome? Or the soft agreement of many pencils tapping yes at once? In cafes lighted by amber globes, artists lean in, saying sport is a language the body writes on air, and poets nod, deciding to steal that line later. A painter studies the curve of a hurdler's back and finds a new way to shape a river. A sculptor watches a weightlifter hesitate just a breath and carves the hesitation itself, the most human of intervals. Critics worry this marriage of sweat and sonnet will embarrass both, but audiences hum with the pleasure of recognizing grace wherever it hides. Micro-hook. What if beauty doesn't care whether it wears marble dust or stadium dust, as long as someone notices? Across Europe and beyond, small clubs practice the Athens manner. Humble, exact, hospitable. A librarian in Brussels posts a sign that says, "Quiet, please, except for cheering at results," which is copied by handwriting into 6 other cities before winter. Women gather in parks at early hour, skirts pinned for movement, faces bright with the odd freedom of trying. Some frown, some scoff, some quietly applaud from windows, and the path widens by footsteps rather than decree. A Swiss physician compiles gentle training notes for ladies' health walks and slips in intervals that look suspiciously like intervals. Micro-hook. Is progress the headline or the footnote that refuses to stay small? Meanwhile, the Panathenaic Stadium keeps doing what old places do best, holding the mood. Visitors drift through at midday, let their hands ride the railing like a slow river, and leave a touch warmer. A boy from Patras recites the names of winners as if they were saints, and his sister, bored at first, begins counting strides between steps and invents a game. She later teaches an entire schoolyard. A groundskeeper tapes a yellowed clipping inside a broom closet and nods to it each morning, a private vow to keep the stage honest for whatever play arrives next. Micro-hook. What rituals do we hide in plain sight so we can be brave without announcing it? Trains carry talk to Paris. Schedules will be crowded by expositions, crowds will be large and distracted, and still the core must be kept. Lanes clear, eyes kind, rules plain. Coubertin, older by a few thoughtful lines, insists that the games remain a lesson in character more than pageantry. Let spectacle be a guest, not the landlord, he tells a clerk who takes it down as if it were a proverb. Translators coin phrases that feel right in the mouth. Attempt valid, attempt void, tie rerun, protest received. Officials rehearse courtesy the way sprinters rehearse starts. Micro-hook. Can hospitality be a technique? Telegrams skitter like bright fish across wires. Commitments, invitations, the occasional apology when a budget collapses. Carpenters build stands that smell of resin and rain. Seamstresses stitch flags that will tangle gently in the same breeze. And vendors test lemonade recipes with the seriousness of chemists. A violinist volunteers to play softly near the warm-up area, discovering tempos that help a heart settle. In a back office, a woman clerk draws a bracket for a fencing bout. neat arrows and squares, and pauses long enough to imagine her own name there. She smiles without bitterness. Time is a patient apprentice. Micro hook. What do we owe the future versions of ourselves who are already waiting at the door? In distant ports, sailors teach one another a Greek word for bravo. And a Japanese rower writes to a friend about marble and laurel and the way a crowd can feel like a sea lifting a boat. In Cairo, boys run on dust and learn the taste of pace. In Stockholm, a teacher rings a habaraswap, avoin, small bell, and has her class stand quietly for 10 seconds. The Athens pause, she calls it, and discipline becomes a ceremony instead of a threat. Scattered everywhere are small shrines to effort. Shoe nails saved in envelopes, ribbons pinned inside jackets, a stopwatch placed on a mantle like a clock that remembers not hours, but courage. Micro hook. If you mapped the afterglow, would it look like constellations? Separate lights that only make sense when you connect them with your own line. As Paris nears, a debate blooms and refuses to wither. Should athletes be paid? What counts as pure? How to welcome those who work with their bodies for a living without ruining the lesson for those who don't. Tempers lift and settle like kites. Resolutions arrive with humility. Declare rules plainly, enforce them evenly, assume good faith until proof requires otherwise. And always, in the corner, someone reminds the room of Athens. Of dust quieting under evening, of a crowd learning to clap for strangers, of a water carrier who ran like a sentence finished cleanly. Micro hook. When in doubt, to which memory do you anchor your compass? The night before departure, Coubertin takes a last walk around an empty practice field, pockets heavy with notes and a pebble he means to leave on a Paris windowsill. He watches a strayed dog trot the curve of the cinder track and lie down exactly at the finish line, as if to say, I keep this place while you're gone. The moon is a small coin in a black purse, the air good, the path clear. He thinks of the boys and girls he will never meet, whose mornings will be altered by what these gatherings teach. That effort can be tended, that fairness is delicious, that cheering for others oils your own rusted hinges. He tips his hat to the dog, to the field, to the idea, and turns toward the station where trains wait like paragraphs ready to be read aloud. Micro hook. If you could send one sentence ahead to greet the next city, would it be, come as you are and try as you can? Paris receives the relay like a city born for relays. Boulevards combed, kiosks bright with broadsheets. The exposition spreading its glitter like spilled stars, and somewhere within that, dazzle, a modest corridor kept clear for the thing that must remain simple. A start line, a finish line, a shared breath between. Athletes arrive into a maze of marvels, moving sidewalks and glass pavilions, electric hums and brass bands, and must learn a new discipline first, not to let spectacle steal their pulse. Officials thread signs through the fair's carnival, this way to the field, this way to the water, until the games wear a quiet path inside the larger festival. A French boy, pockets full of ticket stubs, practices a starter's call with a cardboard megaphone when no one is listening. A rower from the Baltic puts a palm against the Seine's stone quay and nods as if greeting a cousin. And Coubertin, watchful, repeats the old instruction to himself, let spectacle be a guest, before setting his papers on a desk that rocks slightly with every passing omnibus. Micro hook. In a world that can do fireworks on command, can patience still earn an audience? The schedules try to braid themselves around the exposition's sprawling calendar. And sometimes the braid slips. A fencing bout begins late because a mechanical orchestra refused to stop playing. A discus throw finds itself in conversation with a parade of hats. Yet when the bell rings and opponents salute, time shrinks to a useful size. Students lean over railings with notebooks, sketching lunges and parries as if they were verbs newly discovered. A woman in a sober dress watches long jump in a corner of the field, face intent, mouth a thin line of wish. She will write a letter tonight. The line between spectator and participant is thinner than anyone admits. On the infield, gymnasts move through routines that would have made the Athens crowd gasp, but Paris has already seen a tower stitched from iron, and so applauds with the special warmth reserved for care rather than novelty. In a small tent, a seamstress mends a tear in a singlet and refuses money, pinning the fabric with the efficiency of someone who has mended more important rents. Rifts between tempers at her own kitchen table. Micro-hook. If all becomes cheap, does attention learn to be expensive in the right ways? The river events run like an extra artery through the city. Eights slide past bridges, oars scalloping the Seine into patient chevrons, coxswains flicking glances at shadows from arches to judge speed the way shepherds rid clouds. On a grassy bank, a family spreads a checked cloth and eats cherries to the metronome of catches and feathering. The father, who has never sat in a boat, teaches his daughter how wrists should turn, and she imitates him with a cherry stem as if it were a handle. Further on, cyclists take to a velodrome that smells of pine and varnish. Laps, chalking themselves into the air until the crowd can count without looking. A bell rings for the final circuit, and every throat lifts a little. A crash comes. Wood on wood, skin on grit. And the arena breathes out, then in. And the fallen rider rises, blood a small red comma. Bike straightened, lap resumed. Applause blooms, not for winning, but for rejoining. Micro-hook. Is courage the moment you decide the story didn't end where it hurt? Fencers share a bow that looks like punctuation. Boxers exchange shy nods that feel like truce before trial. And shooters, calm as librarians, study wind as if reading marginalia in the air. A judge with a neat mustache adjudicates a dispute by asking both sides to explain the other's argument first. They do. They blush. They agree. A baker from Belleville walks a tray along the railings, handing out pieces of sugared brioche until the tray is light and his hands are sugared too. In an alcove of the exposition, a painter mounts quick studies of athletes, backs, ankles, torsos at rest between efforts. And the little crowd that collects is surprised by how peaceful the bodies appear when not proving anything. They look like people who remember how to breathe, someone says. And the painter, face dusty, nods. Late in the afternoon, a sudden shower tickles the dust rather than vexes it. And runners take the wet track like a gift, feet drumming out a rhythm you could warm your hands to. Micro-hook. When the world is a carnival, do you steady yourself by holding a rail or by learning the ride's music? At night, Paris shines in a manner that would make Athens squint. And yet the athletes, many of them, choose quiet over glare. A few stroll the exposition with soft astonishment. Telescopes, telephones, a kitchen that cooks with coils. And then repair to cramped rooms where socks steam by windows, and the day's numbers are written small in a corner of a letter home. A Greek visitor stands on the Trocadero and thinks of the marble bowl of the Panathenaic Stadium, astonished that different shapes can hold the same feeling. In a cafe, a debate ends with laughter and a promise to revisit the question the next time someone clears a space, draws a line, and says, "On your mark." And somewhere near the velodrome, a little girl who ate cherries by the river wakes in the middle of the night, lifts a broom like an oar, and practices the feather turn in moonlight. Micro-hook. Perhaps tradition is just a child rehearsing tomorrow's grace with whatever tool the day has left within reach. London takes its turn with the steadiness of a clock whose maker loved both precision and tea. Fog thinning to let out crisp mornings, where white lines on green fields look like fresh sentences. Stadiums here feel like good manners made visible, stands orderly, ropes politely insisting on space. And yet beneath the starch lives the same warm pulse Athens taught everyone to notice. Athletes arrive by rail past hedgerows and allotments. The city's bricks stacked like a promise not to tip into chaos. And the first notes you hear are not fanfares, but boots on walkways. The slosh of rain shrugged off by groundskeepers who whistle tunes that sound like dry weather. Archers in tweed jackets string their bows with a concentration that could mend families. Rowers on the Thames cut water into ribbons, and the wind then irons smooth. And runners discover that cinders here spring back kindly underfoot. A Welsh boy with a lemon in his pocket times races on a borrowed watch and returns it each evening with a handwritten thank you. Micro hook. If order is a fence, does it keep harshness out or keep care safely in? Debate arrives with its sleeves rolled. Distances must be exact, starters consistent, protests heard without injury to pride. Officials test tape measures against one another and agree to disagree only about the best biscuits for tea. Women, still mostly absent from some events, begin to seep into schedules where stubbornness had kept them out. Lawn tennis and archery taking on a choir's new harmony as voices join. A suffragist stands near a gate and counts not heads, but nods of respect as athletes pass. She writes in her notebook, "A crack in the door is also a kind of light." And she is right. Long jumpers lay prints that look like tidy arguments. And when a dispute flares, the head judge, a former schoolmaster with eyes like clear chalk, has both athletes explain the other's case before deciding. Tempers relent under the discipline of empathy. Micro hook. Is fairness a rule book or a habit of listening until the knot loosens in your hands? On the infield, hammer throwers whirl like small weather systems, then bow to the circle that contained them. In a corner of the grounds, a crew of volunteers, teachers, clerks, widowers who wanted something to carry, set out cups of tea that taste like patience. A Scottish sprinter spends 10 minutes helping a rival warm stiff ankles, saying only, "We run better if we both can." And the stands hum with approval. Across town, gymnasts share a practice hall with a brass band that pauses rehearsals whenever a routine needs quiet, then resumes softly as if wrapping the air in a shawl. Cycling takes to a velodrome smelling of pine tar and thunderstorms. And when a chain snaps, a mechanic produces a spare, wrong size almost, but files it to fit on the spot, applause arriving like a small rain. Micro hook. When luck blinks, do we curse it? Or squint and keep building until it looks like help? Rain visits often, being English, and meets its match in towels, sawdust, and an attitude that treats weather as a colleague rather than a foe. Sprinters run through a mist that makes their eyelashes jeweled. And the photo finish man, a novelty, his tripod like a thoughtful heron, studies streaks of silver and declares margins thinner than a sigh. In rowing heats under pewter skies, coxswains read ripples like footnotes, adjusting calls by half words. Spectators, coats buttoned, cheer in a register that suggests church and pub found a compromise. At dusk, lanterns cast steady circles on the walkways, not candles, never. And couples stroll, talking about countries they will never visit and still feel curiously fond of. Micro hook. How far can belonging travel on the back of a story told carefully to a stranger? Meanwhile, letters with Athens and Paris postmarks yellow into keepsakes. A London printer sets type for programs and sneaks his daughter's drawing, a tiny laurel, into the corner of a page. A favor the committee never notices, but thousands of eyes do. A nurse on night shift learns to pace herself by how athletes speak about the last lap. You don't fight it, you invite it. A school installs lane lines in the yard and discovers fewer quarrels because children love rules they can understand. In pubs and parlors, arguments stay friendly longer because someone eventually raises a hand and says, "Explain his view first." And the room laughs at the old judge's trick but obeys it anyway. The city grows kinder by rehearsing courtesy in public until it sticks in private. Micro-hook. If culture is muscle, which repetitions make it strong without making it hard? Closing ceremonies taste of rain and relief. Medals hang like quiet moons. Handshakes take a breath longer than necessary. And the band plays an air that underlines rather than announces. Trains out of Euston fill with tired legs and tidy joy. A boy asleep with his stopwatch still in hand. An archer's bow wrapped in a blanket like a baby. A runner's spikes threaded together and looped over a seatback. Coubertin, older again, writes by window light that skims across his page. Keep the core clean. Let spectacle borrow the room but never own it. Widen the door and mind the hinges. Somewhere on the home county's dull gold fields, a girl jogs a hedgerow with her braid tucked into her collar, and a farmer, watching from a gate, decides the world is not ending after all. The games move on, not as a caravan of wonders, but as a school that keeps changing buildings while keeping the lesson. That effort, witnessed fairly, turns strangers into neighbors, and neighbors into a we. Micro-hook. When the tents come down and the lines wash away, what remains? The records, the rituals, or the rhythm your heart learned while clapping for someone else? Stockholm greets the procession with pine-scented air and lakes polished to a calm mirror, a city that seems to have ironed its skies as neatly as its schedules. Venues are handsome without boasting, wooden stands smelling faintly of sap, lanes crisp, boats aligned like good thoughts, and the welcome is a kind of quiet competence that makes even nerves behave. Athletes arrive on ferries that kiss the dock softly, then disperse along paths where birches stipple the light, learning the taste of orderly kindness. Timing grows surer here. Electric clocks wink their precise consent. Photo finishes trim arguments to agreeable slivers. And the program widens into new rooms. Modern pentathlon, a little novel of courage told in 5 chapters. Art competitions too, where sculptors and poets submit works inspired by sport, so that marble and meter can cheer from the same gallery. A young American of Sask and Fox Nation heritage, Jim Thorpe, moves through decathlon and pentathlon with a gait that reads as sentence after sentence of plain, beautiful truth. And the stands, not yet fluent in describing such breadth, resort to the best word they have: complete. A Swede wins at home and bows with a modesty that feels like architecture. Teams eat herring and black bread by the water, and laughter, untranslatable but unmistakable, hops between languages like a bright stone skipping. Micro-hook. If excellence arrives wearing work boots and a shy smile, do we remember the boots? Or the way the smile taught us to applaud with our whole chest? Elsewhere on the program, women compete in swimming and diving with grace that answers old doubts without rancor. A race in open water leaves the river stippled, and the crowd softly astonished at how quickly surprise can grow into respect. A diver's entry barely kisses the surface, and the audience discovers a new species of silence. Reverent, alert, unafraid. The officials take notes that look like recipes, precise and transportable, and musicians stationed discreetly near warm-ups offer strings at a tempo hearts seem to prefer. In town squares, children string twine between lampposts and invent hurdles out of chalk shadows. A printer sells postcards etched with rings, Coubertin's 5, sketched a few years earlier, colors braided like a handshake across continents. And though they aren't yet the flag above the field, they already travel in pockets the way songs do. Micro-hook. When an idea finds its shape, does the world change at once? Or by the gentle clink of keys, exchanged hand to hand? Then a hush rolls over calendars. The war arrives like weather that will not take a hint, and the games go quiet without melodrama, as if a beloved theater agreed to lock its doors until the storm passed. Stadiums sleep under tarps, stopwatches rest, lane lines fade into grass, and the habit of cheering for strangers is packed into drawers with uniforms and hopes. Letters grow heavy with other news, and yet inside some of them, in a corner of careful handwriting, someone adds a promise. When this is over, we will gather again. A line that keeps its pilot light through hard winters. Trees grow a ring or two, tracks sprout daisies, and patience becomes a discipline taught by necessity. Micro-hook. Is resilience a roar, or the small, stubborn decision to keep the tools oiled for a future you can't yet see? When Antwerp finally lifts the shutters in 1920, the air smells of rain and relief. The city, bruised but upright, hangs flags with a sincerity that needs no explanations, and for the first time, the 5-ring banner rises where all can see it. More tapestry than triumph, a statement that difference can be braided without knots. Athletes march with faces older than their years and younger than their hopes, and the applause has a timbre new to the ear. Gratitude tuned slightly lower than celebration. Events feel familiar and newly precious. A starter's pistol coughs smoke, and everyone smiles because smoke this time means only a race. A weightlifter sets his grip, and the crowd lifts with him. Proof that empathy is a muscle memory. A runner stumbles, and a rival steadies him at the elbow. No calculation, just reflex. A tiny treaty signed in sweat. Medals hang like quiet moons again, and laurels touch hair as if checking for fevers now gone. In cafes that smell of yeast and ink, people speak softly of absences, then louder of continuities. A young volunteer writes to a friend, "We are practicing peace." And she isn't being poetic, only precise. Micro-hook. When a city hosts after sorrow, what matters most? The records, the ceremonies, or the discovery that applause can also be a kind of healing? As trains depart, the Antwerp platforms ring with the polite clatter of luggage and the new old rhythm of plans. The games have learned something from silence. How to value breath, how to make rules tender without making them weak, how to treat spectacle as a guest who can bring flowers but must wipe their feet. The torch isn't a torch yet. That ritual will arrive later. But the feeling is there. A warmth carried forward by people who have learned to warm one another. And somewhere on a damp morning, a groundskeeper repaints a faded line with the care of someone mending a seam, while a child, watching, asks if she may try. The brush is heavy, the stroke wobbles, the smile massive. The future, it seems, enjoys practicing with slightly imperfect tools. In the soft afterlight of a century's worth of starts and finishes, imagine walking a quiet loop around an empty stadium at dusk. Any stadium, really. The names change, but the feeling keeps its shape. And noticing how the air remembers applause the way a shell remembers the sea, faint but faithful. The seats are unoccupied, the lanes untroubled, the scoreboards asleep. Yet the place hums with all the versions of us who once gathered to lend strangers our breath. You can trace the history with your fingers without touching anything. Athens polishing marble like a mirror for courage, Paris teaching schedules to behave, London ironing weather into good manners, Stockholm offering pine and precision, Antwerp practicing peace, Amsterdam opening doors wider, Los Angeles inventing neighborliness by building a village of rivals, Berlin's Oval insisting on the older grammar of fairness despite the banners. London again, thrifty and luminous, stitching grace from rationed thread. You can hear, if you stand still long enough, the pendulum beat of Nurmi's stride, the clean punctuation of Liddell's faith, the long sentence of Zatopek's stubborn grace, the lyric comma of a diver disappearing without fuss, the exclamation point of a high jumper who finally clears the word almost. Further on, beyond the running, you notice the parallel story told in small domestic gestures. A seamstress pinning a rip no camera will ever see. A groundskeeper repainting a line with the care of a parent braiding hair. A baker sliding a sugared roll into a pocket as if nutrition were a form of applause. A mechanic filing a chain to fit because a race is a promise worth keeping. A judge asking two rivals to argue each other's case until understanding arrives on its own feet. The grand narratives travel easily. Records, banners, flags in wind. But the quiet ones, the ones that last in the skull's private theater, are made of ordinary decencies rehearsed until they become reflex. A hand outstretched at the elbow of a stumbling opponent, a longer pole lent without drama, a lane shared in warm-up without territorial grumble, a crowd learning to cheer for effort even when the jersey is not their color. One might say the ceremony is the spine and the gestures are the breath. And together, they make the body of a tradition that refuses to calcify. Somewhere, on another continent or the same one turned by time, a child is learning the Athens pause, those 10 cooperative seconds of hush before a start. Using a school bell or just the count of their own pulse, and without realizing it, they are inheriting more than sport. They are being taught how to make space for other people's tries. And so the loop continues, past torches that learn to be invitations rather than orders, past protests that learned to be petitions instead of fists, past programs that grew roomier without losing their neat edges, past cameras that learned to love form without becoming cruel to faces. The future will carry its own weather, lean years and loud ones, cities shy and cities showy, moments when rules save us and moments when kindness does. But the core remains workable, so long as we keep lending it the simplest tools. Chalk that can be rubbed away and redrawn. Tape measures that agree with one another. Stopwatches that care more about honesty than drama. And a habit, sturdy and portable, of meeting excellence with attention rather than envy. If you listen as you finish your walk, a last sound rises like evening swallows. Not fanfare, not fireworks. Just a many-tongued murmur saying what every good host and every good guest learns to say in the same breath. Thank you for trying. Thank you for watching. And the echo folds itself into tomorrow, where somewhere a starter will lift an arm, 100 hearts will hold still together, and one clean crack will release the sentence we keep writing with our bodies. We are here. We will try. And when you try, we will watch well.